Hello, listeners. This is the Risky Planner Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Actually, so totally separate topic. Yesterday, I went to a panel hosted by the Canada Club, and it was on indigenous involvement in capital projects in Canada, in particular, a new piece of legislation that mandates indigenous involvement in all major projects in Canada. And we're in like a crazy build phase right now. It was really interesting. It was, better late than never, I guess. But it was super interesting. I learned a lot.
You know, I am by no means a libertarian, okay? But one of the like libertarian talking points that actually really does resonate with me is, why make a law when another one already exists? And I don't know with 100% certainty what the like legal coverage framework is for indigenous consultation, but I do know that there is one at the provincial level in Alberta, at the very least, because I've done a fair bit of work here in areas where it's traditional native land, and there's lots of activity on it that, for example, we have to respect the hunting and fishing rights of the indigenous populations when we're designing things like our construction seasons, and the eventual impact of whatever we're building has to be, has to comprehend that or make some kind of compensation for removing it with their consent, right?
Like this is a conversation that
it's a conversation, it's a back and forth, having. And literally every project I've ever worked on anywhere in Canada has involved an indigenous consultation piece, where there is like a real concerted effort to involve everybody and make sure that like opinions are respected and that they're in the room literally, right? Yeah. So, it's always like, it's easy to kind of glom onto the narrative that indigenous rights are being, violated by these major projects and, the companies that run them. And I am sure that is true to at least some degree, like depending on where you look, right? Like on which project, which owners, like all those things. There's going to be some of that's true for sure, but it's not true like across the board. You know what I mean? Yeah. And even those times when rights are not properly respected, like those are regrettable things that we should all be learning from. But it's not the norm, right? And there's also like there's a responsibility on the part of major infrastructure owners and new project proponents to get that right. But there's also a responsibility for the indigenous groups to show up, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, that's what this panel was talking about, is this new advisory council. Yeah. So it's not like one community or nation. I mean, it's a conglomerate, like it's a group of nations together. And when a project gets identified and picked because it is a very good project and we should be building this advisory council comes in and makes sure that the process by which, that owner operator is building, the process for involving whoever,
so like they're nation, catching everybody and all that
pretty
stuff.
Pretty much, it's like have everybody's like at the table.
That sounds great, honestly, because
we'll see what happens.
Well, for sure, yeah, it's all proof is in the pudding type of stuff. But
the
biggest failure I've seen on projects is that they make a good faith effort to engage everybody. They do all of the communication sweeps and they catch as many indigenous groups as they can. And there's always one or two that just aren't contacted.
Yeah, that aren't contacted.
And why that remains a mystery to me. I feel like I've been on at least one or two projects where the answer was we just didn't know they existed, right? Like we had no idea they were there. Our suite, because like they all the major companies.
I think that's their attempt is to prevent exactly that situation.
That's what
right?
Based on what you're saying, like that's what it sounds like, and that would be a genuinely useful thing, honestly.
It sounds like it.
But the other part of it, and it also sounds like something this council could maybe help with, assuming it takes the form of a council or something. But like, if because the other problem is like there are a fair handful where you attempt consultation, they just don't respond, right? Like they just don't come to the table at all, even though they've been invited. And then when the rubber meets the road and it's time to go do project, all of a sudden they're there and be like, well, why weren't we consulted? You know, and it's like so like the flip side of those coins is like you can never really be 100% sure which type of failure you're looking at right away, right? So it's tempting to just assume, oh, well, we tried and you didn't say anything, so like joke's on you, buddy. But like that's not the right way to handle it.
Right.
So
the fact is that situation happens.
It does happen.
Really, no matter what community you're engaged in, right? Like it happens I'm in Toronto, you're in Calgary. Like it happens even like, you know, neighborhoods. It happens with residents. I mean, it's like literally any group. It's, you know, a lot of people aren't responding or reacting until, well, maybe it's
kind of too late. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, it was really interesting. And the thing that we left with, I actually got a lapel pin that's actual moose hide. And it's the Moose Hide Campaign, which is a indigenous led grassroots movement of men and boys who are and it's for all Canadians, but indigenous led and men and boys that are advocating and fighting against violence against women and girls, which I thought was, I mean, I like lapel pens for my suits.
That's a good one.
It was pretty unique. It was like, hey, this is moves, but
that's a good one for a lot of reasons.
So check out. I want to give them a shout out, moosehidecampaign.ca. And
we can put a link to that in our show notes too,
we should.
Right, Nate?
Yeah.
By the way, good. Speaking of which, I'm Albert. He's Nate. This is the Risky Planner podcast.
Welcome everybody to the Risky Planner podcast. Boom. So let's switch gears. It's pretty interesting. Like we're going to talk about oil. A lot more than just oil, but like oil and supply chains and war.
Nate buried the lead 3 list items deep there.
Right.
Because we are recording this on March the 12th, which makes this, I believe, we're 2 weeks in to the Iran war at this point, something like that.
Yeah.
We changed gears last minute to record and talk about this instead because, quite frankly, what else is there to talk about right now, Nate?
That's right. Well, I mean, the supply. I think what's wild is, just watching the price of crude oil. I was looking at like Brent crude, and this morning it was at 99, and then I watched it go to 100, and then to $100.50, and then I mean it's just you can see it ticking up and up, and it whipsawed from what $70 to $120 and back to $80, like all in the span of a week, maybe more.
It's
like
it's
9
been
days.
Nuts. It's been nuts.
Yeah, so we're switching gears because it's like, what is the impact on all of the supply chains that are serving the capital projects? This to us is like, what does it all mean for capital projects and
like
sponsors?
I think before we get rolling on that, I mean, it's worth mentioning that we are a project management podcast. So that's the element of this that we're going to focus on. But it is a colossal human tragedy happening all across the region right now, and has been for years, right? Like, because of, conflicts between Iran and its neighbors. Sorry, I meant to say Israel and its neighbors, actually. Iran, backs some of the groups that, Israel seems to enjoy. I hate to use that word, fighting against. But, given how often they do it, it's difficult to find another word. But anyway, at the risk of getting political, I just want to say, like, we're not blind to the fact that this is a human tragedy with human stories involved, and that there's a lot of injustice, and it's clearly a war of adventure. There's no reason for any of this to be happening right now, but it is happening. And if you are a project director, if you are a VP, if you are in the C-suite of a company that runs projects, you need to be thinking about it from these financial and practical perspectives. But that doesn't mean that it has to get the human side of it has to get lost. It doesn't. Like we're living with that all the time. That's probably the part of this that you and I talk about the most, actually.
Yeah, I think that was a really good. I thank you for that, because that's a good sort of segue into the topic. And we don't want people to think that we're just ignoring some of that, but we want to focus on what our expertise is, right? Like
but
that's
if any way you can help, go help, right? Like figure out a way to make things easier for your friends and maybe future friends that live in the region. And there's a lot of expats who are stuck out there. There's a lot of that's in addition to the obvious issues with people who live in Iran and the neighboring countries. It's a bad situation for everybody.
Well, and we have colleagues too that are they have family, and they're from various countries in the Middle East. So we, have some, they have connections. So it's
English expats who are, stuck in the UAE, unable to travel, sheltering. We have one of our directors is from Ras Al Khaimah. No, he's not. He's in Ras Al Khaimah now. He's from Abu Dhabi. Like he's from an extremely short walk from the U.S. Air Base in Abu Dhabi. So you bet when the bomb started falling, he got his family out.
Yeah.
And we were very pleased to hear that he's okay. But there's a lot of those stories going on right now. This is not a project management story first, but it is the element that we're going to cover the hardest today.
Yes, let's switch gears.
Yeah.
So I've been following this closely because I can't not, anything if it's global, political, macroeconomic, whatever. Like, Albert, this is like, let's just focus on the capital project environment. Like, this was already under pressure, right? So tariffs, inflation, talent, we've talked about that. And all of a sudden, it seemed like overnight, the Strait of Hormuz was just completely closed.
Yep.
Right? And traffic, nobody's going in or out. Like now ships are being attacked. Like it is shut. So, Albert, my question to you, just to start us off, is when you look, if you're sitting with a project sponsor who has, a high investment capital portfolio in any sector, we don't, nothing specific. Like, what's the first decision they should be considering? Like, what do you think their first decision they should be considering today?
Well, like this is, our friend and colleague Roger has been all over this on LinkedIn. He's been talking about the impacts of the closure of the Strait and what they mean for a risk profile. And, I snuck in his comments and made my 2 cents. So I'll kind of repeat what I said there, which was that this is a really good example of the purpose of enterprise risk management, right? Like one project. Yeah. Well, okay. So like the distinction here that I'm making is between project and enterprise risk. So, both are effectively measured in dollars, right? Like they're measured in money. But some of them are a little more granular and some of them are a little bit more global. And it really boils down to who has the responsible authority to manage the impacts of that risk. So at the project level, things like, I'm building a tall structure, somebody might fall off it and die, right? That's a risk you can manage at the project level. So you make sure that everybody has fall arrest. You have, important pre-job briefs that are mandatory, that involve a lot of participation, on-site safety stuff, regular training. You've mitigated that risk as much as you can, right? And you can do all that at the project level. But there are other risks, like the Strait of Hormuz is closed because of a war, right? Like that is not something that a project manager can do anything about at all, right? Project managers are receivers of the impacts of that. So you have to think about, like, your framing of the question was spot on, because you're talking about people who are sitting at the portfolio level making big decisions. That's where enterprise risk management comes
can I interrupt you real quick? So
yeah, please.
Do you think that these people, the project sponsors, the portfolio level, do you think they considered that this would happen? I mean, if you're involved in, I guess, the region, maybe you would.
This is where, like, Rogers. Well, first off, because the region is not exactly the most stable place on Earth. The region we're talking about is the Middle East, of course. But like that, there is some amount of baking in of risk that you do when you're doing work out there, or when you're dependent on inputs from there. So yes, is the short answer. Of course they did. But did they think about this specifically? Like maybe it was on a scenario board somewhere, right? But it's probably not how they are building their risk allowances. You don't think. I mean, obviously, when you're trying to build a risk profile for a like the geopolitical risk attached to a region that supplies you with goods and services, then you have to think about some of the plausible things that might happen out there. So, I mentioned it earlier, but like Israel lashing out against its neighbors or its neighbors lashing out against it is a fairly plausible scenario, right? It's one that you can kind of put on the dream board and say like, well, not the dream board, the nightmare board, and say like, this might happen, right? So we need to think about that as part of our overall risk exposure, right? Like our risk universe includes things like this. Did it include this specific thing? Almost certainly not, right? This was a surprise to basically everybody.
But the executives must have been, if they were dependent on this, like you say, like once the U.S. buildup of ships and military, Navy, once that buildup started happening, I imagine that some of those conversations began.
Yeah,
with those teams.
Well, they
and those
began
boards.
amongst me and my friends too. So, like, if me and my buddy from college noticed that F-16s are sortying with equipment that has only ever flown on test planes before, right? And now suddenly they're being deployed, to the Middle East, or that's what seems. You know what I mean? Like, you can follow the logistics trail. If my buddy from college and I figured it out, a lot of other people figured it out too.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
But that was like 2 weeks prior to it happening. That is not enough time to adjust enterprise risk footing.
Not at all.
Right?
No.
2 weeks is 0 days, right? At the enterprise level. I mean, these decisions are made over the course of, quarters, mostly years and chunks of 5 years, right?
Yeah,
so
actually, I was talking to somebody at the University Pension Fund here in Canada, and I asked if this was affecting sort of their portfolio management. Totally different industry, but I mean, they're planning 3-5, more years out. So the risk of supply chain disruption, I mean, that's factored in, but it doesn't affect them because they're in a completely different space. But it's just interesting that everybody's talking about it.
Well, of course. I mean, they have to be. But like, they're not thinking about it because of the 5-year plan. They're thinking about it because of the next quarter plan, right?
Exactly.
I mean, so because if you think about it from the perspective of, I can't remember the name of the guy, but there's like a retail investor who made himself somewhat famous by outperforming most hedge funds and professional investment firms and things by basically never buying or selling anything. Right. Like, his portfolio is extremely stable, and he has outperformed most of the professional hedge funds just because he's not reactive to markets. He's just like, it'll even out. And
he did not buy GameStop. He did not buy GameStop.
Well, but the point is that even if he had bought GameStop, he also bought GameStop.
Yeah.
He also bought other things that were hedges against GameStop.
Of course.
And he didn't do it. He didn't like panic sell GameStop, right? If he owned it, he just waited it out. Because things do tend to even out, and the general trend is towards growth, right? So when you think about it from that perspective, your next quarter as a portfolio planning director looks really rocky and unpleasant for you,
right?
But the next 5 years looks the same as the last 5.
So so in terms of that quarter, what's the decision that they should be considering just for the next quarter?
Well, it's not necessarily true that so most of these guys have these folks, I should say, have their budgets locked in already, right? So whatever they're going to be executing over the next 3 months, like, they know what that money is. They can't really spend more than that. And they really shouldn't be spending less either. So if they've got that time already programmed out with what they intend to spend, then basically the risk part of it just takes a bigger chunk of that space away to actual do work, right? So if they're assigning dollar values to all of these enterprise level risks and using that to inform their capital planning, then the risk component of that just got a little bit bigger is what happened.
Okay.
So that just means that the actual capital spend part is getting squeezed out somewhat. But weirdly, in a way, this might actually make some portfolio planning look a little better than it would have without the war.
Really? How so?
Yeah, because especially when you're dealing with big tranches of small projects. Projects tend to get delayed on schedule, which moves their cash flow to the right? Like, it moves everything out. So if you had a capital plan that had you doing 3 projects that cost $100 million, why do I always give myself fun math problems? 4 projects that cost $100 million in the next quarter, and one of them gets shoved out, then you're only going to be spending $75 million.
I see.
Right? Okay. So the overall cost of that work just went up because of the war, but the impacts in quarter maybe actually smooth out versus your plan.
Okay.
this is a really dangerous. I like to compare this to squeezing the toothpaste to the end of the tube. Like it does have to come out at some point, right?
My dad Captain Habermeyer used to use the paper clip. You remember the little black metal paper clip?
Yeah. I use the binder clip.
Yeah, the binder clip. That's a Navy issue.
That's what I do.
That's funny. Well, so
I'm basically a submarine captain, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you are basically. Yes, we can all be Captain Habermeyer in our heads. So the real cost impact on capital projects and may appear quarter like years later. It may appear whenever. It's not going to happen today, but it's going to happen sometime later.
You mean the impacts to like long-term planning?
Yeah, like 90 days, 100. Are we talking 180 days?
I think we're going to see some quarterly revisions amongst publicly traded companies in the next quarter.
Like maybe when they do their quarterly announcements, they're going to talk
exactly.
about some of those.
That's what I'm saying.
So what other industries do you think are experiencing disruptions with this, the war in Hormuz being closed down? Like I've heard about fertilizer, right?
Yeah.
Like being disrupted?
Well, you know why, right?
Why?
Because a huge percentage of the world's urea, UREA supply comes from there. And that's a key input into fertilizer.
Okay.
And basically, when the Strait of Hormuz is closed, an enormous amount of that urea is trapped where it is, right?
Wow. Okay.
Which means that, if you are, say, an American farmer and you're thinking about your spring planting season and you've placed orders for fertilizer like last year, those orders are being reported as stranded now, right?
Wow.
By the logistics companies. And there are some force majeure claims happening there. We'll get to that later. But the price for fertilizer is about to skyrocket, like for sure.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big, and that's getting a lot of news coverage now. One that's getting a lot less coverage though is aluminum.
Yeah.
So a huge percentage of the world's aluminum comes from the Middle East.
I don't know why I thought aluminum went into fertilizer when I asked the question. But anyways, it shows how much I know about livestock. But what you're saying is that if you're a farmer, all of that, like it's going to affect, that's where the consumer effect comes in because the price of beef goes up or the price of chicken goes up or the price of, I don't know, corn in the fall goes up. Like it just depends on what the fertilizer is for.
Well, we'll see supply constraints. We'll see price hikes for sure. And what I find really kind of fascinating about this is I was doing a little research over dinner about this in anticipation of recording this episode, but also just because I find it interesting. I was curious because there's a lot of talk about the strategic oil reserves, right? Like in the U.S. and elsewhere.
Yep. Like yesterday was the big announcement.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So releasing some, and that's going to help a little bit. But the thing I was curious about is, okay, oil, fine, makes sense. There's like an international treaty that governs strategic stockpiles of oil. What about other things? Like, do nations maintain strategic stockpiles of other things? And the short answer is yes, but not the U.S., right? Like the U.S. doesn't have a strategic fertilizer stockpile, right? But guess who does?
China. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, it's deemed a national asset there. So in China, like fertilizer is meted out to farming interests on an as-needed basis by the government.
Interesting story that I have. Let me take us on a tangent real quick on just on that. So about 12 years ago, we had a Chinese mining client who came to Regina to buy the permits to mine potash outside of Regina from, get this, the Russians. And so our job, my agency's job, I was, on the ground with the clients, was basically to keep this 24, this group of 24 Chinese engineers and I don't know, chemical engineers and others out of the news, out of the Regina newspaper, basically running around. I've been to every Chinese restaurant in Regina, but it's because China has designated fertilizer, potash, as a strategic asset. I mean, it's food, right? So that does not surprise me.
Yeah. No, but it's something that didn't click for me right away until I asked the question and did a little bit of reading on it. And it's not just China. Like India also maintains a massive urea buffer, which they've announced publicly that they have enough to get them through the next monsoon season. They had pre-bought a lot last year, which has started to look like a really smart strategic choice at this point. But yeah, so and this is another example of the U.S. pulling out both of its guns and immediately shooting itself in the foot, right?
Yes.
It's because the U.S. doesn't have a strategic urea or fertilizer stockpile. They also don't maintain an aluminum reserve, right? Some countries do, but the U.S. doesn't.
That's going to affect capital projects big time.
It's going to affect capital projects more than arguably than fertilizer, and
100%.
And maybe not as much as oil, but it'll be similar.
Yeah.
I mean, there are force majeures and shutdowns and all that things happening across the region, like the most high profile of which is Qatar's Catalum plant, which has just begun a controlled shutdown. And that is because of a lack of incoming, like risk to their supply chain, basically. So it's because of the LNG stuff that they weren't able to continue producing. LNG is a whole separate thing. Like LNG is also blockaded. So it's just, and because like oil and LNG and aluminum and, fertilizer, like that's going to have ripple effects across every element of the economy.
Well, it's funny you like fertilizer, the discussion, because it makes me think of food and then it makes me think of talent, right? And then also to your point about attacks on Qatar is like water supply. Right, Bahrain.
Yeah. Oh my God! Yeah.
Bahrain has a desalination plant that was attacked by I think last weekend by an Iranian drone, and that water supply cut off maybe to dozens of villages. Right, so there's a knock-on effect, a direct effect on human talent for these projects, and that's another big. It's going to have a huge impact.
It is, and Dubai also had a near miss on a desalination plant recently. And like, if you're cutting off the route to the plant, you may as well destroy the plant, right? Like you can't operate it; it doesn't work. So there's a lot of concern about that right now. Back to my let's not ignore the human cost thing. Like attacking critical water supplies is in fact a massive violation of international human rights law, and the reason is because it immediately degrades the civilian population's quality of life and lowers life expectancies, right?
Right.
If you can't get access to enough clean water, you get sicker, you die faster. It's bad, right? Obviously, this has impacts from a humanitarian perspective, but it also has impacts on who can be doing which projects and where, right? The workforce is what it is. It's all but it's made up of humans.
I'm glad you pointed that out because you and I do have these conversations. So yes, you 100%. There is the massive humanitarian crisis, and arguably that is most important.
It is most important.
It is,
but like we said earlier, project management podcast. So let's talk about the project management element of it.
Let me so just on the topic of like the desalination plant you were talking about, if it get hit you got to destroy it. Like then there's Strait of Hormuz, there's LNG, there's urea, there's crude that goes through there. Like these are multiple systems that are failing simultaneously, right?
Yeah.
So is that shipping is failing, energy is failing, water infrastructure is failing? Like, are risk registers even equipped to manage that kind of like simultaneous failure? Like, what do project control teams do, or what are they thinking about?
No.
What should they be thinking about? Is what I should ask you.
The short answer is no. They're not equipped to handle it. And like, you kind of mentioned offhandedly the Houthis, but like it's worth mentioning that the Houthis started resuming attacks in the Red Sea, right? So that's not the Gulf, right? That's the Red Sea. So this is where the Suez Canal is, right? So now the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed, and the Suez Canal just got a lot more hazardous. Like there are oil supplies now being shipped in the other direction, like by super long pipelines to get to the Red Sea. But then once it gets there, Houthi attacks, right?
Right.
Or
around or around Africa, right? I mean, it adds so much extra time.
Oh yeah, well
and costs.
Yeah, I mean we're already exactly. So like if you are a container ship and you're trying to de-risk your route, you're not looking at the Suez Canal or the Strait of Hormuz. You're going all the way around, the Horn of Africa, and that's weeks. It's thousands of miles. It's extra risk. It's extra delays.
So how does the project controls team look if they're thinking about a schedule? What should they be thinking? How should they be thinking? What are they thinking? Well, I guess that's a lot of questions there.
It is.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you.
When should they be thinking?
Yes.
The answer to that last one is 6 months ago, right? Because when we do a quantitative risk assessment for our projects, which we do a lot of those, right? As part of our embedded project control services, we provide a lot of quantitative risk assessments for our clients. And there's always two elements to the risk inputs, right? Broadly speaking,
what are those two elements?
So those two elements are discrete risks, right? Like risk events that you can see coming, or things. I gave an example earlier of the worker climbing on top of the tall tower and falling off, right?
Right.
Like that is a risk you can see coming. There are other risks that you can't see coming, but something like in the big stew pot of craziness that happens to projects and in the world, something's gonna happen, right? So we call that, depending on your preferred definition, systemic risk or base uncertainty.
Okay.
So the idea that for reasons, in scare quotes, things will be delayed and they will cost more, right? And it's difficult to say. And by the way, for similar reasons, in scare quotes, things might come in sooner and cost less. So base uncertainty and systemic risk is often modeled, in both directions, right? Positive and negative. History tells us that positive wins out, right? Projects cost more and take longer. They don't cost less and take shorter. That's just how it is, right? So when you're modeling for systemic risks and uncertainties, you typically would, put a rightward bias on them.
Yep.
So you're supposed to, as a project team, maintain a reserve of time and money that is sufficient to cover off your discrete risks and your systemic risks and uncertainties to a certain confidence interval, right? Now, your average, when we set up program and portfolio risk methodologies for our clients, we typically would put the project p-value or the confidence interval at 50%, and the program or portfolio one at somewhere between 70 and 90%, depending on the risk appetite of the company, right? So the in broad strokes, what that means, and in poor words, is that every project in your portfolio has a 50% chance of succeeding or failing, given the conditions that existed at the time, but the whole portfolio has more like a 70 to 90% chance of succeeding.
Right.
So, and that's how you want it, right? Like you want every project to be beholden to its neighbors. Like it's a balancing act of which capital goes where. We actually have written a paper for the AACE. I mentioned this on the last show, so I won't get too deep into it, but like it covers off some of this about the different ways that the math works out when you do things. Without getting into the technical specifics, the reason I bring it up is you have a lot of projects who have estimated for these systemic risks and uncertainties, doing the best and most responsible job they could at the time, that are now looking like maybe they won't complete on their P50, but they might complete on their P70. Right?
So it's more or less like just a mindset and adjusting the schedule is what you're saying? Like they're going to finish, but it's not going to be what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some of that, right? The most immediate effects are coming from, we talked about those container ships getting rerouted around Africa.
Yeah.
If you have a piece of important equipment, we just talked to a client about procuring medical equipment, right? So if you got a CT machine, coming in from China, and it was going to go through, well, maybe not coming in from China, that would make sense. They would just go to California. But, if coming from, so I gave you a really terrible example, but let's just run with it.
Yeah,
so
fair enough. Right. It's all,
how about this? We're buying surplus equipment from a hospital in Dubai. That makes much more sense. Okay.
That does.
So that container ship is now going all the way around Africa. Your piece of equipment is now weeks behind schedule, right? So you can't even do project until it shows up. So, if you're replacing old equipment, then the risk of that equipment failing has just gotten higher, so there's a lot of things going on when your schedule gets delayed. But yes, what you basically said is accurate. Like things will happen. It'll just take longer and it might cost you more.
Right. You brought up force majeure, which I want to ask you about now because, to me, I don't think I've ever, seen like force majeure being can we say activated at
declared?
Declared at this level. Like, it is mind-blowing to see that happen, because that is going to, that's going to, like, I mean, the economist said it right. Like, the world economy has changed overnight. And when somebody's declaring force majeure, people are thinking about contracts, and they're thinking about rates, and they're thinking about, exposure to those contracts and what's the fine. I mean, there's so many discussions to be had when that happens. Yeah. So think about and put me into the mind of the project controls team. Like, what are they doing right now, considering, maybe their contracts aren't going to be honored?
Well, this is where things get really hairy from a contracts management perspective, because you remember COVID? Remember that a few years ago? It was this crazy pandemic. Remember that? Yeah, me too.
Yep.
The reason I bring it up is that was a good example of the worst case scenario for price impacts from a situation like that.
Right.
There were legitimate supply chain disruptions that made prices go skyward, and they kind of didn't come down. Why? Because companies realized they could get away with selling things for more money, and so they did.
Do you remember the Evergreen getting stuck? The Evergiven getting stuck in it was run by Evergreen, but the Evergiven getting stuck in the Suez Canal, and like the disruptions that caused too. That was pretty major.
Sure.
Not as major as COVID, but definitely major.
But it was actually more like what's happening now, in that it's a short-term shock that has ripple effects, right?
Yeah.
And that's definitely what's happening now. But the reason I bring up COVID is there is going to be a temptation amongst commodity resellers and, people who install equipment and buy equipment for you, things like that. There's going to be a temptation to jack prices up, whether they are impacted by this situation or not.
I think there was legislation in like some countries around like just price gouging and, groceries. Yeah. And I think.
Well, it's war profiteering, and it's disgusting, but it is realistic, and it does happen,
Yeah.
So it's the kind of thing that, you as a project management team need to be really mindful of, because you can't, I'm a big fan of the phrase trust but verify, right? So when your contractors are coming to you and saying, hey, we're going to see, a $40,000 impact and a 2-week delay from this piece of equipment, you need them to show you their receipts, right? You need them to show up with documentation. You can't just take their word for it. They're going to say something to the effect of like, well, aren't you watching the news? I'm like, yeah, I'm watching the news, and my CT machine is not specifically in the news, so you need to give me some information about it. Right?
Well, and those end users are going to start submitting claims, right? They're going to want money back, or
that's why a claims process is really, really important to any project, right? I mean, and this is earlier when you said, when I was kind of joking around, I said, well, when should they be thinking of this? And the answer I gave was 6 months ago. I mean, that's part of the reason why, because a strong claims process that requires proof of impact, right? Yeah. And that impact statement to be evaluated and all that stuff. Like, a good claims process should exclude the stuff that's too small to matter, right? That where you're just throwing good money after bad by chasing it and evaluating it. So like small claims and small changes and things should be absorbed by the project plan and the existing contracts.
Well, there's big ones like for this,
exactly. Like that's, at least in principle, that's what the contingency is for. So as long as you kind of have some comfort level that you quote unquote planned for this as part of your discrete risks or your systemic risks and uncertainties, you should be able to pay for some of the small stuff. But some of the really big dollar stuff that constitutes, by virtue of needing to replan your project, it kind of constitutes a scope change, Right. So like, because your planning basis
So how so? What do you mean?
Well, like if my scope basis is that I'm going to do things X, Y, and Z, like irrespective of any time or sequencing, my scope is X, Y, and Z no matter what happens in the world, right? But the fact that I'm installing X, Y, and Z doesn't necessarily mean that I'm doing them in that order. Maybe I'm doing them sequentially. Maybe I'm not, right? Maybe I'm doing them with different contractors. Maybe it's the same contractor, right? And all of that stuff taken together, I think of all those things as elements of your scope, right?
Right. Okay.
Because the scope is defined by your contracts, not just by your design and by, like your project brief or anything like that. Like there's a lot of things that go into what your scope is, and contracts are a big part of it. So if your contracts need to change, that's effectively a change to your project's scope, right? Even if X, Y, and Z didn't change, what sequence they're coming in, how you're contractually arranging things, all that stuff like that all is changing. Right. So, the 6 months ago comment was about the project systems that are in place need to be able to absorb and handle those kinds of things, regardless of what the source of change is. Like
so,
today, it's a
real
Iran,
message is if you don't have it, you better be.
It's too late.
Fast.
The horse is out of the barn. Yeah,
Horse is out of the barn.
The horse is out of the barn. Yeah, exactly. So we're really, as project professionals, it's incumbent on us to make sure that those things are there in case we need them, right?
Yeah.
So, the handshake agreement, I could plan this on the back of the napkin, like, great for you, but what about this, right? Like, I guess your back of the napkin plan probably did not include a war of adventure in Iran, this week.
The claims process is interesting. I think some companies, like in COVID, there was like kind of a wait and see trap, if you will. Like, it happened. People just kind of paused. Companies paused on project. Let's wait and see. Prices went up. Then suppliers left those prices alone. Then stuff cost extra. So is the instinct at the enterprise portfolio, is the instinct to pause and wait for clarity, or is there something else at play?
Well, that instinct is damaging.
Yeah.
To macroeconomics and maybe even to your individual project. And I'll tell you why. Like we touched on this in a season 1 episode we talked about how the worry about COVID actually wasn't inflation at first; it was deflation, right? Because when the Great Depression was caused by a deflationary cycle, or was exacerbated by a deflationary cycle, where people are concerned about the state of the economy and hold back their money to buy things, and then the money starts to dry up. And all of a sudden they're like, well, now I can't afford to buy that thing that I wanted to buy, so I need to wait for the price to go down. So then you get a glut of supply. Inventories build up. And as we know from previous discussions, inventory is not an asset, it's a liability, right? So when companies have that much liability on their books, by the way, in accounting terms, it is an asset. I understand that. So all you can is just sit down. Just sit down.
Hold
okay?
on.
I understand. All right. But from a planning perspective, it's very much a liability, right?
Right.
Because if you don't have a thing in a warehouse, it can't catch on fire, it can't get stolen, it can't be mishandled, like it can't be misdelivered. Like if it doesn't exist, nothing can happen to it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I don't think any of our listeners are going to be grabbing like their P&L and be like, no, it's an asset. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. So
well, I welcome the conversation. So if you are a corporate accountant and you take great umbrage at what I'm saying, like, let's talk about it. Like, come at
we'll
me.
leave a link in the show notes for comments and feedback. But if you're an accountant, please by all means leave a comment.
And fill out our survey,
Albert. Yes, thank you.
Fill out our survey too. Tell us what an idiot I am and how I don't understand how accounting works. That's I would love that. I would love nothing more.
So let me ask you. Oh, sorry. You're going to go
back
ahead?
to the. Well, let me see if I can remember what I was trying to talk about there, like the deflationary cycle.
Yeah,
right?
the deflationary. Yep.
So as inventories build up, right? Companies don't need to make as much stuff, which means they lay people off, which means that people have even less money on average, which means that prices continue to go down. So that's the deflationary cycle that the Great Depression was kind of built on, right? So the quantitative easing and government spending and those kinds of things are what traditionally help get you out of a deflationary cycle, and a lot of that happened during COVID, and that's like the point of that is to be inflationary, right? Because a healthy economy is slightly inflationary, right?
So if I'm a board, I'm at the enterprise portfolio level project sponsor, the real choice is not to pause, wait, that trap. That truly is a trap. You're saying it's to reconfigure and then press forward somehow.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, it's really it's a tough pill to swallow, right? That your thing's going to cost more and it's going to take longer, but you should still do it, right?
Like, does a project sponsor say to the PMO, like, well, actually, what do they say? Like, what's that conversation like?
Well, I guess that depends on. I say that answer a lot. It depends on the project, right?
Yeah.
And it really does. Like,
hard hedging.
And there are going to be some tough decisions that need to get made, and we're kind of I might want to save this for my piece of advice.
Yeah, don't give it away. Don't give it away.
I won't give it. Not yet. No, you got to listen to the end for that. Sorry, Charlie. But the main thing the main point I want to make here is that just the fact that things got harder doesn't mean you should stop necessarily. Okay, there is definitely a wait and see trap that you were alluding to earlier. If things aren't going to get any better, then that means that they're either going to stay the same or get worse. Well, that's becomes your new planning basis, right? Because you can't plan on running a company that's project driven and just not doing anything ever, right? Like eventually you are going to have to do project at some point. So, if you put too much of that stuff on ice, you're impacting your future cash flow, because the point of capital projects is to make you money down the road, right?
Yeah. Well, so cash flow, interesting, right? Like that's an interesting topic, like interest rates. We talked about inflation. You're talking about deflation. Like the Fed is kind of in a no-win position, right? With this you're
talking about like national banks more generally, really.
Yeah, more generally. Like it's not really a win-win position that they're in, I don't think. Like I'm reading The Economist and they're talking about negative supply shocks, like inflation starts to happen, it hurts growth, then like even futures, the market pricing is implying that no change of a rate cut is happening. I think in some of my research, there's the 10-year treasury yield. Like these are already climbing, right? Like they're getting higher. So there's impact. If I'm a capital intensive organization and let's say I'm financing projects with debt, like how am I supposed to be interpreting this on the topic of financing?
I mean, the numbers are going to go up for almost certainly. And so this is going to be really, this is why you described it as a no-win scenario, I guess, because the typical way that you encourage growth in an economy is by lowering interest rates, but the way that you curb inflation is by raising them, right? So we have slower growth and higher inflation, which we've termed that stagflation in the past. That's a an economics term. It's one of the boogeymen of economics. And a stagflationary cycle is really, really damaging for an economy, and we really don't want to get into one. But right now, it seems like it might not be possible to avoid it, because if you try to keep things stable, right, they're currently, like benchmark interest rates in the U.S. are a little higher than they typically are. So if you keep them the same, then you're not encouraging growth, right? Because you're not flooding the market with cheap capital to let people go do project and make a bunch more productivity happen. But if you do lower them, then you're contributing to a bunch of other inflationary pressures that are going to drive prices way up. And so any productivity gains you might have had, they won't be evenly shared, because that's just the world we live in, the cyberpunk future where a vast majority of the wealth is controlled by an incredibly tiny number of people. So like when you are talking about productivity gains, they tend to get concentrated amongst the ultra wealthy who don't need it, and the rest of us are left wondering, well, I just got a raise, but I'm still poor, right? Like, that's the problem with trying to stimulate an economy in a situation like this, is that prices will go up and they will outpace the benefits of that economy as they surface to most people.
Well, and that on the topic of capital projects, like these owner-operator companies are not going out and financing a capital project, based on like a reserve account that they have. Like they're going out and financing it with the banks, with governments.
Yeah, like a lot of capital projects are heavily leveraged, right? So it does mean that industries and companies that can self-finance projects are starting on third base right now. But that also means that their portfolio just shrunk somewhat. Earlier I said, you got a project in the pipeline, go do it. But that can't necessarily, practically there are limits to that, right? Like if you can't afford the financing, then you can't afford the project, then you're self-financing and you kind of have to find that money somewhere, right? So the traditional way of finding that money is by selling off assets and laying people off, right?
And maybe at the end of a rainbow.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, those of us who don't own gigantic multinational companies are hoping for a leprechaun situation right now.
Exactly.
That would be
it's not gonna help. Albert, we've covered oil shocks, supply chain, simultaneous kind of crashing We've talked about force majeure, exposure, workforce risk, water, the humanitarian cost and all that. There's a lot hitting our project sponsor listeners right now. So
yeah,
I think for your one piece of advice, like what I'd like to ask you is if you're sitting across the table from let's say a VP of project controls, maybe a CFO, somebody who's looking after sort of the enterprise portfolio, like what's your one piece of advice for something they should do by the end of the month?
Well, I imagine that these meetings are already happening, but if they aren't, then here's the meeting you should have, right? We were talking earlier about these planning cycles being multiple years long. The next few quarters are planned out with scope-driven cost estimates for what people intend to do, and some of those projects will be in flight right now, right?
Yeah.
And those in-flight projects are the ones that are at the greatest risk because they're the ones that didn't have the opportunity to price all this stuff in, except as uncertainty and systemic risk, which is likely not going to be enough for a lot of them. So you're effectively having to bucket your projects in your pipeline in three ways. Like first are the projects that you accelerate, the ones that you bring to now, right? Those are going to be the ones that are insulated from these exposures, right? Because they're driven by domestically produced materials or things that you have on hand. You can execute them quickly and locally. Those kinds of things are where you should be spending your money right now, because it limits your exposure to a capital environment that has gone haywire, at least in the short term. So you really need to just like take those things and focus on them, right? So that's especially true if you have projects in the pipeline that are coming up soon that have dependencies on things that are supplied out of the Middle East or things that are going to be impacted by the more broad, price increases. One of the things like the fallacies told in the U.S. right now is, well, we're oil independent, so we're insulated from this. No, you're not, right? Like the U.S. is a net exporter of oil and of energy more generally, and they are the largest LNG supplier in the world. And they're already hurting from these because the prices for these commodities are not local; they are global. Right. But having said that, having that local supply does help, and it gives you levers that you can pull that other countries won't have, right? Like the U.S. is currently exporting an enormous amount of LNG and does not have a specific stockpile for it. Well, what if it did, right? Like one act of Congress, which, right, that's going to happen, creates an LNG stockpile and encourages the U.S. government to spend taxpayer dollars on buying LNG so that they can do easing in the future. That is the kind of thing that could actually happen. So, but it can't happen if you don't produce enough of it to store, right?
Right.
Otherwise, you're buying it from the open market. We're back to square one. Yeah. So anyway, domestically produced materials and things on hand and stuff that is procurement light and labor heavy, accelerate those projects.
Okay.
The really, really tough one, though, is that some of the projects that are in flight right now may become unaffordable because of current price fluctuations. So you either need to mothball or cancel those.
Okay.
Right? There is, you guys, you're very aware of the sunk cost fallacy.
Sounds like the second bucket that you're going to get into right here.
Yeah. The second bucket is shut
it?
It down, right? The second bucket is shutter.
Okay.
Like there are plenty of projects out there right now that are not going to make their money back, right? Okay. Because the prices that they're about to pay for commodities, both basic and finished, are going to go up in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like how much that increase is, like we really don't know yet, but it's not nothing, right?
Right.
So if you're taking a risk impacted view of your portfolio, which you should, then there are projects in your pipeline right now that are active, that are in progress. That's going to feel bad. It's going to feel bad to cut those projects, but you have to, right?
Right.
So that's bucket 2, and bucket 3 is basically for all the remaining stuff. It's time to do a comprehensive replan.
Okay. What does that entail?
Well, I was talking earlier about the enterprise risk component to portfolio planning.
Okay.
Right? And how that takes up a bigger share, So if you're thinking about longer procurement cycles and, just schedule extension more generally, and you're thinking about higher prices for things, then, in your head, you're probably building a little cash flow diagram, right? You now have a bigger number spread out over a longer period of time. And no matter how you slice it, that's different from whatever you had before, right?
Right. So bring the team together and
you need to bring the team exactly. And to have that conversation.
Yeah.
You got it, right?
Wow.
So, it's really, and by the way, the shuttering projects thing, it sucks and it's going to hurt, but it frees up money and also human capital, right? Like the people who are working on those projects and the materials they had procured to advance those projects exists in your organization today, right? So it's you can think of it less as like I'm cutting things, it's going to feel bad, and more like I'm freeing up resources, right? So that I can do some of these higher ROI projects. Because right now, this is real dog eat dog stuff in the project v project, because that's how it breaks down at the portfolio level. Projects are battling with each other for capital, for the scarce resource of money, right?
Right.
So they have to make their case way more strongly than they would have 6 weeks ago. So, that's just the facts of life. But once that conversation happens, you're going to wind up with a more robust portfolio that's more easily able to weather this storm. And if things get better, you can do it again, right? You can come back together. You can have the conversation again. You can replan things again. But I'm betting that a lot of the decisions that get made over the next 6 weeks will be durable for the next at least 6 months, right? And probably a year or two, right? So that's part of the reason why, I said earlier, the 5-year picture probably looks a lot like the last 5 years, and I do genuinely believe that, but that doesn't mean that the next 2 years look the same. They won't, right? And this is why. Anyway, that's my take on it.
Yeah, so, thanks, Albert. Well, thanks. That was an interesting conversation. So I just want to mention our listener survey. Please, if you're listening, we would love to hear your feedback. If you're an accountant, you can thrash Albert on his liabilities versus assets. But yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback. It's a survey. You check out our show notes. You'll find a link. We're going to use some of that for, planning future episodes. Very important that we hear from you. So
absolutely. And I enjoy reading them. So if your only goal in life is to give me joy, then that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Well, thanks, Albert.
Thank you, Nate. Hey everybody, it's Albert here. Thanks for tuning in to the Risky Planner podcast. We hope today's conversation was informative and above all else inspires you to excellence in what you do. If you like today's episode, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps us reach more listeners just like you. I'd also like to thank Thompson Igbo for letting us use his excellent music on our show. If you like what you hear, check him out at igbomusic.com. That's EGBO music.com. Talk at you later.